The blood-dimmed tide of the galaxy's greatest war finally receded, leaving behind a silence thicker than nebular dust. For 3 brutal generations, the stellar alliance known as the Concord had fought the relentless, hive-minded swarm. The cost was etched in the dead husks of planets and the hollowed-out eyes of survivors. Victory, hard-won and bitter, belonged to the Concord. As the last swarm nexus fell dark, a solemn, universal armistice was declared. Warships, scarred and weary, became symbols of a fading nightmare. Across 1,000 systems, beings turned their minds to the monumental task of peace, of rebuilding, of forgetting. And then, from the silent, unmapped void beyond the galactic rim, it arrived. Not with the shriek of weapons or the tear of reality, but with the quiet, awful power of a truth too vast to comprehend. It was a ship, a human ship. Its design was archaic, a brutalist slab of alloy, and weaponry speaking of a simpler, more direct kind of war. Its transponder, blinking to life for the first time in living memory, broadcast an ancient, pre-Concord identifier, UNSS Vengeance of Terra. Its arrival was an impossibility, its timing a cosmic cruelty, and its first calmly delivered broadcast, directed not at the victors but at the ruined, defeated swarm, shattered the galaxy's fragile new dawn. Terra Command, this is Vengeance. Primary mission parameters updating. The swarm threat appears neutralized by indigenous forces. Awaiting new orders regarding the original primary target. Galactic Parasite Designation 0. The real war begins now. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of a breath held before the plunge. The battle had ended, and humanity, forgotten and presumed extinct, had just declared war on reality itself. The armistice celebrations on the Concord capital world of Seraphis Prime were a somber, dignified affair. There were no raucous cheers, only the soft chime of memory crystals and the low hum of hymns for the fallen. In the grand conclave chamber, beings of light, stone, and fluid gathered under a holographic depiction of the newly quiet warfront. Chancellor Kvor, his amphibian skin mottled with the stress of decades of command, addressed the assembled representatives. "The shadow is lifted," he intoned, his voice amplified in 100 languages. "Now we build in the light." The light was interrupted. Every screen in the chamber, every personal comm, every planetary defense grid display flickered and was overridden by a screech of raw, uncompressed data, a format dead for centuries. The image that resolved was a grainy, color-drained view of a bridge. It was cramped, functional, and filled with figures clad in bulky environment suits, their faces visible behind clear visors. They were bipedal, mammalian. Their features were grim, etched with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. Unified Earth Space Command Frequency. This is Admiral Harlan Rook commanding the Sol-class dreadnought, UNSS Vengeance of Terra. We are on the periphery of Concord demarcated space. We are detecting extensive energy residue consistent with total war. The speaker's voice was a dry rasp, devoid of the musical undertones common to Concord species. It was the sound of stone grinding on stone. Pandemonium, silent and stunned, gripped the conclave. Humanity? They were a myth, a footnote. A young, vibrant species that had ventured into the dark, only to vanish without a trace 200 standard cycles ago, just before the swarm's first attacks. Their loss was a prelude tragedy to the greater symphony of war. The Concord's swiftest remaining responder, the Lance of Seraphis, was dispatched. Its commander, Valerius of the crystalline Ealdan, hailed the ghost ship. "Vengeance of Terra, you are entering secured space. Identify your purpose. Your species is listed as extinct." On the Vengeance's bridge, Admiral Rook's expression didn't change. He looked at the visual of the elegant, shimmering lance with the analytical disinterest of a geologist studying a rock. Extinct is an overstatement. Isolated. On a mission. Your database is incomplete. We have been engaged in a containment action. We are parsing your recent historical data feeds. You have been fighting the secondary adversary. The swarm was our only adversary, Valerius responded, a chill creeping into his harmonic voice. Rook actually smiled then, a thin, terrible cracking of his weathered face. He turned to someone off-screen. Lieutenant Shun, broadcast the pre-march protocol summary. Level 1 disclosure. What flooded Concord networks was not a weapon, but a cognitive virus. It was history, humanity's history. Starships not of human design, sleek and organic, appearing over old Earth in an offer of peaceful union. The first contact. Then the slow, horrifying realization. The offered technology wasn't a gift, but a symbiote. A gentle, insidious rewriting of neural pathways, a suppression of aggression, of individualism, of the very spark of defiance. It was a paradise of peace with the price of the soul. They called themselves the Gardeners. Humanity's response, taken in secret by a fractured global government, was the Exodus Fleet and the Vanguard Protocol. The Exodus Fleet, thousands of colony ships, would flee, dispersing into the void beyond any known star maps, a desperate bid for a future. The Vanguard, 12 planet-killer dreadnoughts, including the Vengeance, would stay. Their mission, wage a guerrilla war of such utter, relentless viciousness against the Gardeners that the Gardeners would be forced to focus entirely on them, believing humanity to be a singular, warlike anomaly to be quarantined and eradicated. They would be the blaze to hide the fleeing embers. The transmission ended. The conclave was ice. The swarm's ships, their biology, it was a crude, militarized mirror of the Gardner technology. The swarm was not the source. It was a tool, a weaponized pruning shears, sent to cull the garden the Gardeners had cultivated, the Concord. Rook's face returned to the screen. We harried them, bled them, led them on a chase into the void for 2 centuries. Our last engagement was a trap at the Perseus Veil. We believed we had exterminated their last pursuit fleet. We entered cryo-suspension for the long drift home to expected radio silence. We awoke to your war's aftermath. He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of flint. You didn't win your war, Concord. You trimmed the weeds. The gardeners are still out there. And now they know their carefully cultivated garden can fight back. They will be coming. And they won't send shears next time. On Seraphis Prime, Chancellor Kvor looked from the haunted faces of his fellows to the grim visage of the human on the screen. The silence in the chamber was no longer the silence of peace, but the silence of a tomb. The battle they had just won was revealed as a skirmish in a war they never knew existed. And the galaxy's only experts in fighting the real enemy were ghosts from a dead world, who had just declared their long, lonely war was now everyone's. The revelation was a psychic supernova. Across the Concord, the carefully constructed narrative of heroic sacrifice and hard-won peace shattered. Statues of swarm-destroying heroes now stood under a suspicious shadow. Were they liberators, or merely pests who had angered the true owners of the garden? The Vengeance, a scowling, angular leviathan of scarred tungsten and primitive plasma conduits, hung in orbit over Seraphis Prime, a stone in the shoe of galactic civilization. Admiral Rook and a hand-picked squad of his iron-skinned Marines disembarked onto the Conclave's main landing spire. The contrast was jarring. The Concord delegates shimmered in robes of light and woven energy. The humans were monolithic in their powered armor, their movements emitting a low hydraulic whine, their helmeted faces scanning not for beauty, but for cover, firing lines, and threats. They didn't walk, they patrolled. The diplomatic reception was a disaster cloaked in courtesy. The Eeldan offered crystalline nutrient gems. The humans tested them for biological agents before consuming them without comment. The gaseous Valerii attempted a graceful flow of formal greeting. The humans' atmosphere sensors buzzed warnings about particulate density. Rook himself, out of his armor, but looking no less formidable in a simple gray ship suit, addressed the conclave with the demeanor of a trench officer briefing recruits. Your technology is elegant, he stated, without admiration. It's also derived from Gardner-based principles. Your faster-than-light drives use dimensional harmonics they pioneered. Your medical pods use tailored bionanites. Your entire technological tree is a branch they cultivated. It has backdoors. A young, fiery Valerii diplomat, Tlek, swirled with indignation. You speak of parasites and backdoors human. Yet you arrive in a warship from a dark age. Your only solution seems to be more violence. We have spent generations ending violence. Rook's gaze settled on Tlek. You ended a symptom. We've been treating the disease. Your peace is a conditioned response they built into your tech, into your culture, to make you docile, manageable. The swarm was their solution for when a part of the garden grew thorns. Like us. You cut the thorns. They'll now reset the soil. To prove his point, Rook's tech officer, a woman named Eris, requested access to a primary Concord data node. Reluctantly, it was granted. Using a snarled, non-intuitive code language, she unleashed a series of archaic digital warfare protocols, human computer viruses. Within minutes, she demonstrated how the Concord's seemingly secure communication network had a latent, nested layer of protocols that could be activated by a specific Gardner carrier signal. It was designed not to destroy, but to pacify, to flood neural interfaces with soothing impulses, suppressing aggressive thought. A galactic anesthetic, Eris called it, her voice cold. Panic turned to paralysis. The Concord's greatest strength, its harmonious, interconnected society, was its greatest vulnerability. They were sitting in a gilded cage, and humanity had just pointed out the lock. Yet, not all were convinced. A faction led by Tlek saw the humans not as saviors, but as barbaric ghosts, poisoning their hard-won peace with paranoia. They bring only fear and the stench of an ancient war. Tlek argued in closed sessions. Their very presence is a trigger for conflict. We must make them leave. The debate was cut short by a priority alert. A deep space monitoring outpost on the fringe of former swarm territory had gone silent. Then, it had reactivated, broadcasting not a distress call, but a perfect, serene copy of its standard operational signal. Except it was now emanating a low-level version of the pacification wave Eris had identified. Rook was on the Vengeance's bridge within minutes. "They're here," he said, no triumph in his voice, only grim validation. A scout, a probe, testing the garden's new resilience. Vengeance will respond. The Lance of Seraphis was ordered to accompany them, to observe. Valerius, his crystalline form humming with tension, watched as the human dreadnought prepared for war. There were no graceful energy shields. Instead, meters-thick alloy plates slid over vital areas. Weapons banks, physical magazines of solid projectile cannons, and missile pods cycled openly. It was brutal, inelegant, and horrifyingly direct. At the edge of the dead outpost's solar system, they found it, a Gardner vessel. It was beautiful, a swirling, ever-shifting knot of luminous, organic geometry, like a living galaxy. It made no hostile moves. It pulsed with a soft, welcoming light. A broadcast filled the comms, not with words, but with direct emotional packets, feelings of peace, unity, safety, and a gentle sorrow for the misguided conflict. On the Lance, several crew members lowered their weapons, their will to fight dissolving in a wave of blissful calm. Valerius fought against it, his crystalline mind more resilient. On the Vengeance, alarms blared. Psionic emotive attack identified. Countermeasures active, a synthetic voice announced. The human crew, their faces set, worked through a wave of artificially induced serenity. Their implants delivered sharp electroneural shocks, their training focused on rage. Rook simply bit down on his lip until blood dripped onto his console, the pain anchoring him. No dialogue ro grolith. They don't negotiate. They overwrite. All batteries fire. Protocol, scorch mind. The Vengeance did not fire energy beams. It launched kinetic kill vehicles, giant, dumb projectiles of dense metal. It fired Ripper missiles that shredded space-time in localized bursts. The Gardner's ship, expecting a target susceptible to its empathic field or at least energy weapons it could harmonize with, was utterly unprepared for this physics-based, analog brutality. Its beautiful fields flickered as it tried to adapt, but the sheer, mindless momentum of the human assault was incomprehensible. It was like trying to soothe a meteor. The Gardner ship was shattered into glittering, dying fragments. The pacification wave ceased. Back on the Vengeance's bridge, silence reigned, broken only by the static from the debris. Rook looked at the feed from the lance, seeing Valerius's stunned, horrified face. That, Rook said, the word of full stop, is the only language they understand. The language of uncomplicated force. Your war, Concord, is over. Ours is just getting started. And you have a choice to make. Learn our ugly grammar or be rewritten. The destruction of the Gardner Scout was a shockwave with two conflicting pressures. For some, like Valerius, it was a horrifying but necessary revelation. The beautiful ship's peace was a weapon. The human's brutality was a surgeon's knife. For others, like Tlek, it was the final proof of humanity's toxic nature. They had not just destroyed a ship, they had destroyed the very ideal of peaceful contact, embracing a savage past the Concord had evolved beyond. Seraphis Prime became a schism. Protests erupted. No ghost war, some chanted. Learn from the Vengeance, others countered. The conclave fractured. Chancellor Kvor, aged decades and days, struggled to hold the center. Admiral Rook, indifferent to the politics, issued a data packet, schematics. Not for Gardner tech, but for human counter-tech. Shielding that blocked psionic emotive frequencies. Neural static generators to disrupt pacification waves. Designs for kinetic weapons and electromagnetic projectile launchers. Technologies the Concord considered primitive. Your elegant tech is compromised down to its roots, Rook stated in a system-wide broadcast. You must build a new foundation using a language they don't understand. Ours. A secret emergency project was initiated in the asteroid belt of a forgotten system. Dubbed the Anvil, it was a joint venture between human engineers from the Vengeance and Concord scientists willing to break their own paradigms. Valerius was placed in command. Here, the cultures clashed not with words, but with physics. Concord scientists recoiled at the inefficiency, the waste heat, the crude mechanics of human designs. The humans were baffled by the Concord desire to make a railgun beautiful or a firewall aesthetically pleasing. A weapon is an art. Chief Engineer Murdoch, a bear of a woman with plasma burns on her arms, barked at an Eldan counterpart. It's a hammer. You don't debate with a rotten wall. You smash it and build a new one. Yet, under the duress of an existential threat, a fusion began. Concord material science, unparalleled in its refinement, was applied to human weapon frames, creating projectiles of incredible density. Human dumbfire, AI targeting, unpredictable and adaptive, was married to Concord sensor suites. The first prototype, a refitted Concord Corvette, now named Unyielding Resolve, was a hybrid monster, sleek lines studded with blocky gun pods, its graceful hull wrapped in the angular scars of human-style armor plating. Plek's faction saw this as blasphemy. In their view, the Concord was surrendering its soul to the ghosts. They believed communication with the Gardners was still possible, that the humans had provoked an unnecessary war. Using back channels in the still partly compromised Concord network, they made a desperate, fateful decision. They would send a diplomatic envoy, using the Gardners' own pacified outpost signal as a beacon of peace, to prove dialogue was possible. They stole a fast courier ship and jumped. Rook discovered the mission too late. Fools, he spat, his calm finally cracking. They're not sending diplomats. They're sending a manual. They're showing the Gardners exactly how much the Garden has learned to think for itself, and how to pacify it. He ordered the Vengeance, and the Unyielding Resolve to pursue. They arrived at the fringe of Gardner space, a region of space where stars seemed too orderly, nebulas too picturesque. The courier ship was there, held in a beam of soft light from a Gardner structure 10 times the size of the Scout, a tender. The emotional broadcasts were overwhelming, promising unity and an end to all conflict. Tleck's ship was broadcasting back, full of Concord cultural data, music, art, a gift to foster understanding. They're downloading our entire psychological profile, Eris reported, her voice tight. Rook made a calculation that would haunt him. He couldn't fire without destroying the courier and everyone aboard. Instead, he ordered a targeted, human-designed weapon, a Screamer missile. It detonated not with fire, but with a massive burst of chaotic, randomized electromagnetic and psionic static. The beautiful light from the tender stuttered. The pacification beam flickered. In that moment of disconnection, the crew of the courier's ship, including Tleck, experienced a jarring clarity. The blissful signal gone, replaced by the cold, hard truth of a void, and the terrifying, majestic sight of the Gardner vessel, now reacting with confusion. They saw for the first time the immense, passive hunger behind the peace. It was not friendship. It was consumption. The tender, agitated, began to change. Its lovely geometry sharpened. From its surface, fighter-like constructs of hard light began to form. It was transitioning from a Gardner to a Weeder. Now, Valerius, Rook commanded, "Show them what hybrid can do." The unyielding resolve leapt forward. It fired Concord energy beams, which the tender shields easily harmonized with and neutralized. But those beams were faint. The human projectile pods fired a split second later, sending volleys of super-dense slugs crashing through the distracted shields. The tender shuddered, its song turning into a discordant shriek of pain. It was not invincible. It could be hurt. It could be angered. The battle was fierce and short. The vengeance provided brutal, anvil-like force, drawing fire. The resolve was the scalpel, using its hybrid tech to exploit openings. Together, they crippled the tender. As it drifted, dying, its final broadcast was not of peace, but of a cold, galactic-scale directive. Asterisk anomaly confirmed. Garden Segment 7X, Concord designation, is infected with persistent, militant pathogen, human designation. Full sanitization protocol authorized. Asterisk Rook's ship recovered the courier vessel. Tleck, his gaseous form trembling with residual horror and new understanding, faced the human admiral. I saw its mind, Tleck whispered. It doesn't hate. It just tends. And we're a weed. Rook nodded, no victory in his eyes. Now you see, they're not evil. They're Gardners. And they're about to burn this entire patch of the galaxy clean. He looked at the tactical display, where the dying tender signal was already fading, a final homing beacon shot into the galactic deep. The warning is sent. The real war they held back for centuries? It starts now, and we have one advantage they've never faced. What? Valerius asked, his form still humming from the battle. A garden, Rook said, that has decided it would rather be a forest. Wild, tangled, and full of thorns. And we just showed them our sharpest one. The galactic sanitization protocol was not an invasion. It was a natural disaster. From the shrouded core regions where the Gardners tended their oldest worlds, reality itself seemed to rebel. Stars along the Concord's frontier flickered as vast, transcendental engines altered their energy output, rendering whole systems sterile and lifeless. Nebulae that were celestial nurseries coalesced into corrosive clouds, scouring planets clean of complex biology. It was not war for conquest, but for pest control on a cosmic scale. The Concord, reeling, had a choice: die as a peaceful, elegant garden, or survive as something else. The Anvil project shifted from a secret workshop to the beating, frantic heart of a new galactic resistance. The schematics from the Vengeance were no longer suggestions. They were lifelines. Shipyards that once produced graceful cruisers now echoed with the brutal clang of armor plate being forged. Artists and philosophers traded aesthetic principles for manuals on neural shielding and kinetic physics. The galaxy was learning, painfully and quickly, to think like humans, to value survival over sanctity, resilience over grace. Admiral Rook and the Vengeance became the grim template, the roving anvil upon which this new resistance was hammered into shape. They led fleets of hybrid ships, teaching them the ugly grammar of war the Gardeners couldn't parse. Unpredictability, sacrifice, and the terrifying power of individual initiative. A Gardner-Pruner vessel, a world killer, would be lured into an asteroid field where 1,000 small, crude mines, each with a volunteer crew, would detonate not with energy, but with shrapnel and spite. A pacification wave would be met not with counter-harmony, but with a barrage of recorded human war screams and discordant, primal music, overloading its empathic receivers. Yet for every system saved, a dozen were lost. The cost was monstrous. The Concorde soul was being scarred, calloused. Chancellor Kfor, in his final address before stepping down to take a post on a frontline foundry, said, "We are losing what we were, but we are choosing what we will become. We will not be a kept garden. We will be a wilderness, and wilderness endures." The final, desperate intelligence from deep-range scouts confirmed the worst. The Gardeners were not sending another fleet. They were activating a final till. A construct the size of solar system was moving toward the Concorde's core, its purpose to emit a galaxy-wide pulse, a reset harmonic. It would not destroy planets, but would amplify the pacification embedded in all Gardner-derived technology to an irresistible level. Every Concorde being, every ship, every AI would be plunged into a permanent, blissful stasis, ready for the Gardeners to gently replant. There was only one possible, insane response, a direct assault on the till itself. The Vengeance would lead the spearhead, a fleet of the most hybridized, neural-shielded ships, the Wilderness Fleet. Their mission was not to destroy the till, an impossibility with their power, but to breach its core and implant a scorched-mind virus of human design, a cascade of chaotic, illogical, and violent data meant to cripple the harmonic before it could fire. The battle before the till was a portrait of hell. The Gardner defenses were beautiful and utterly lethal, swarms of perfect geometric fighters, beams of coherent light that harmonized matter into peaceful dust. The Wilderness Fleet fought with the rage of the cornered. Ships died not in silent blooms, but in fiery, kinetic ruptures. Valerius, commanding the unyielding resolve, saw his crystalline brethren shatter, his gaseous allies scatter. But they pushed forward, a wave of defiance against the tide of order. The Vengeance was a dying beast. Its ancient armor was melting, its decks open to vacuum. Admiral Rook stood on his crumbling bridge, his suit sealed, directing the last of the boarding shuttles toward a crack in the till's reality-warping hull. Yet Eris, and her team inside, he ordered, his voice calm over the screams of tearing metal. The rest of US will hold the door. What followed was a war on two scales. Outside, the Vengeance used its last power to ram a Pruner ship, buying seconds. Inside the till, Chief Engineer Eris and a squad of human and Concorde Marines fought through defenses that were not soldiers, but manifestations of pure conceptual order, walls that sought to soothe them into stillness, guardians that were walking equations of pacification. They fought with pain inducers, with flashbangs, with raw, shouted fury. One by one, they fell not to bullets, but to a creeping, beautiful silence. Eris, bleeding, her leg broken, reached the central core, a chamber of pulsing, golden light, and a song that promised an end to all pain. She attached the data spike, a crude human device like a black dagger in this palace of light. As she initiated the upload, the Gardner consciousness finally spoke to her, not in words, but in perfect understanding. Why choose suffering? Why choose this ugly, fragile existence? Gritting her teeth, thinking of a dead Earth, of 2 centuries of lonely war, of the scarred galaxy outside fighting to be free, she whispered the last human argument. Because it's ours. She slammed the activation rune. The Scorchmind virus erupted. The beautiful song shattered into a scream of static, of human rockin' roll, of war chants, of a baby's cry, of thunderstorms and breaking glass. The reset harmonic faltered, then inverted, becoming a wave of pure, unfiltered chaos that burst outward. The effect was instantaneous. Every gardener construct in the region stuttered, froze, and began to unravel, unable to process the illogical, emotional storm. The till itself cracked like a giant egg, its light dying. On the bridge of the ruined Resolve, Valerius watched as the gardener forces dissolved into harmless light. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace, nor of death. It was the ringing, stunned silence after a cataclysm. They found the Vengeance later, a dead hulk, its crew lost. They found Eris in the corpse of the Till, barely alive, surrounded by the still fading echoes of humanity's last broadcast. The Gardener threat was not gone. They would retreat, reassess. The war would continue, a cold, endless stalemate on the fringe of known space. But the galaxy had been saved from the reset. It was free. Centuries later, the galaxy is different. Not human, not Concord, but something new. A wild, tangled, vibrant place where technology is a blend of elegant and pragmatic, where peace is a choice wrested from the cosmos, not a condition imposed. In the heart of the rebuilt Concord, now called the Wild Accord, there stand a monument. Not to a sleek ship or a graceful being, but to a brutal, angular slab of scarred metal, a replica of the Vengeance. At its base, the inscription reads, in 1,000 languages, just when the battle ended, they taught us the war was just beginning. They gave us the gift of defiance. They gave us our thorns. And in the deep, watching dark, the gardeners tend their ordered fields and glance with something akin to a shiver at the wild, thorny, and fiercely beautiful wilderness that now grows, untamed, next door.